Salam, peace be upon you. My name is Muhammad Laik Siddiqui, the father of Holophase episode 13, The Silent Ground. Part 20, The Source of Objectivity, the Shareable View. There is one primitive, phi, the holophase, a continuous cyclic order that makes reality readable. When phi becomes readable as change, its first differential phase appears, and with it, three inseparable readouts arrive together. The temporal dimension, omega, omega, the spatial dimension, kappa, kappa, and the kinematic dimension, nu, nu, woven from the first two. Every higher derivative is a finer question about how phi changes, and each one casts these three shadows together. What we call worlds, objects, forces, histories, and minds are stable, licensed patterns inside this derivative language. The formal mathematical work behind these ideas can be found on Zenodo by searching holophase. And remember this in one calm breath. We did not begin from space or time. We did not begin from matter or energy. We began from what makes anything readable at all. Phi was introduced as the primitive, and energy was reframed as tally, not substance, while reality itself was held to licensing and coherence, and every claim was forced to carry prediction and falsification, because episode 12 installed the firewall that stops narrative drift. Now, episode 13 unfolds in two movements. First comes undifferentiated phi. Phi before any public change. Phi as the permission layer. What phi is, what phi is not. What you must earn before you are allowed to speak about worlds. Then comes differentiated phi. Phi once change becomes public and licensed. Once omega, kappa, and nu appear as readouts. Once topology can bite. Once tallies can be lawful. Once persistence and memory can be certified. The first must come before the second for a simple reason. If you don't first define the permission that makes anything readable, you will smuggle in a world and call it a foundation. You will call your habits first principles. You will mistake a familiar picture for the ground itself. So here is the compact picture of the whole episode, so you always know where you are. Anchor A is undifferentiated phi, the silent ground. The permission layer, the careful list of what phi is and what phi is not, and why you cannot build anything without earning comparability first. Anchor B is differentiated phi, the public layer. How change becomes readable under licensing. How omega, kappa, and nu appear as readouts. How topology and tallies become lawful. How persistence and memory become possible. How the firewall governs every claim. And right now, we are focusing on part 20 inside this larger episode 13 arc. This is the last permission before the great transition. So I will say the firewall contract early, clearly, and once. If you hear me smuggling space, time, energy, matter, or dynamics as primitives here, treat it as an error. Good. Now we take the final step on the silent ground. We have asked many questions already. We asked what phi is and what it is not. We learned that phi is not a substance, not a field, not mind stuff, not matter stuff. We learned that phi grounds logic, because reasoning is comparison. We learned that phi grounds information, because information is distinction. And now we arrive at a question that is so human, so everyday, and so enormous that it quietly controls almost everything we call truth. What makes something objective? Not just real to me, not just vivid in my private experience, but real in a way that can survive outside my head. Real in a way that can be shared. Real in a way that can be checked. Real in a way that can outlive me. If you strip away the decoration, This is what people have always wanted. They want the difference between I feel it and it is so. They want the difference between my story and the world. They want the difference between persuasion and proof. They want the difference between a private dream and a public fact. So here is the core claim of part 20. I'm going to say it plainly. Objectivity emerges from shared comparability. And because phi is comparability, phi is the source of objectivity. Now I'll say the same thing in even simpler words. A thing becomes objective when many independent pointings agree. When different observers, at different times, using different methods, can still line up their comparisons and say, together, this, right here, rather than that. Objectivity is not a substance. It is not a glow around facts. It is not a magic stamp on statements. Objectivity is a relationship. It is what happens when comparisons converge. It is what happens when shareable checking keeps giving the same result. That is the entire secret. And to make it feel concrete, I will use one story, one only. We will return to it again and again, because the whole point of objectivity is returning and still agreeing. Here is the story. 3 travelers meet at a crossroads. They have dust on their clothes, different accents, different names for the same bread, different prayers before sleep. They come from different valleys. They look up and see a mountain in the distance. The first traveler points and says a name that belongs to his village. The second traveler points and says a different name that belongs to hers. The third traveler does not speak their dialect well, so he traces the shape in the dirt with his finger. A peak, a shoulder, a ridge. They argue for a moment, not because they are stupid, because they are human. Words feel like ownership, names feel like truth. And then something quiet happens. They notice that their fingers are aimed at the same place. They walk a little. The peak stays where it is. They squint. The ridge lines match. They check again from a different angle. Still the same mountain. And the argument changes. They stop fighting over the word. They start agreeing on the pointing. That agreement is the birth of objectivity. Not the mountain alone, and not the minds alone, but the convergence of their comparisons. The fact that despite different languages, despite different histories, their acts of this rather than that line up. Now bring that back to phi. Because what is an act of pointing in the deep sense? It is a comparison. It is a selection. It is an assertion of difference. This, not that. Here, not there. Same, not same. And comparison is phi. So when we say objectivity emerges from shared comparability, we are saying something very precise in Holophase native language. We are saying that objectivity is what happens when multiple phi acts align. Multiple instances of this, not that, agree across perspectives. That is it. Now, why does this matter? It matters because without this permission, everything collapses into confusion. If you think objectivity is a thing out there, you will search for it like a substance. You will imagine a secret viewpoint outside all viewpoints, a view from nowhere. And then you will either become arrogant, claiming you own that view, or you will become hopeless, saying no one can ever reach it. Both are errors. If you think objectivity is just my certainty, you will confuse conviction with reality. You will call your strongest feelings facts. You will treat disagreement as evil, not as data. And you will lose the ability to correct yourself. The firewall exists because humans do this constantly. We drift, we declare, We build castles out of preference. So this part matters because it gives a clean criterion. Objectivity is not a mood. It is not an authority. It is not a tradition. Objectivity is a successful sharing of comparison. It is what survives cross-checking. If you want a simple sentence, objectivity is what remains when personal differences cancel out. Now return to the mountain. If the first traveler points at the mountain and the second points somewhere else, they do not yet have objectivity. They have competing claims. If the third traveler cannot see it because of fog, they do not yet have objectivity. They have incomplete access. What do? They don't scream truth louder. They don't declare the fog immoral. They do something very simple. They change conditions. They walk a little. They wait for clearer air. They compare again. They ask each other to point again. They seek convergence. And when convergence arrives, they call it objective. That, in miniature, is science. Science is not a list of facts. Science is a discipline of convergence, a method for turning private comparisons into shared comparisons, a method for making the travelers point again and again until the pointing stabilizes. And now you can feel why episode 12 mattered. Because the firewall is the rule that says, if convergence fails, you do not pretend it succeeded. You do not decorate a guess as a fact. You do not export your private pointing as a public mountain. You admit uncertainty. You adjust instruments. You repair methods. You try again. This is why we insisted that reality requires licensing and coherence. Because the shared in shared comparability is not automatic. It is earned. It is certified. It has thresholds. It has failure modes. Now I'll push the core claim a little deeper, but still in simple words. A single observer can have experience. A single observer can even have consistent experience. But a single observer cannot, by themselves, generate objectivity in the strong sense. Because objectivity is exactly what distinguishes my consistent dream from the shareable world. If you are alone and every day you see a mountain, you might still be dreaming. You might still be inside a private loop. You have no external anchor. But when you have other travelers and they point too, and the pointing lines up, you have something else. You have a structure that is not owned by any one mind. You have a pattern that appears in many comparisons, not just one. This is the leap from private to public, from subjective to objective. And this is why phi is the source. Because the only way to leap is through comparability, through repeatable distinction, through this, not that does not collapse when someone else performs it. Now, to keep this firewalled, I have to say what we are not assuming. We are not assuming an already built universe full of objects. We are not assuming space and time as a stage. We are not assuming matter as a primitive. We are not assuming energy as a substance. Remember, energy is tally, not stuff, and we do not use it as an explanation here. We are operating at the permission layer. We are saying, whenever there are multiple licensed, comparison-capable systems, whenever differentiated phi yields multiple perspectives, objectivity is the name for their consistent agreement. That's the scope. It applies to any domain where objective has meaning. Science, everyday facts, shared history, even mathematics in a subtle way, because proofs are public objects only when they can be checked by others and survive that checking. And here is the limit. This part does not yet tell you how differentiated phi produces multiple observers. That is later. This part does not yet tell you how omega, kappa, and nu appear publicly. That is later. This part does not yet tell you how topology and tallies become lawful. That is later. This part only earns one permission. What objectivity is in a phi-first universe. Now we need a prediction, not vague, operational, something you can understand as what we should expect to happen if this claim is true. Here is the prediction. Objectivity comes in degrees, because convergence comes in degrees. If you take any claim and you increase the number of independent comparisons, different people, different methods, different times, and the claim keeps converging to the same result, then the claim will be judged more objective. And if the comparisons diverge wildly and never stabilize, the claim will be judged less objective. That is the prediction. Objectivity will track cross-check stability, and that is checkable. You can literally do it. Pick a set of claims. For each claim, measure how consistently independent communities can reproduce the same comparison outcome under the same licensing rules. Then ask people, across cultures, how objective those claims feel. The prediction is that the perceived objectivity will correlate strongly with the measured convergence. Not perfectly, because humans have bias, but strongly because objectivity is, at root, convergence. Now I'll sharpen it even more. If you improve licensing, better calibration, clearer protocols, higher coherence, stronger firewall discipline, then objectivity increases. Because the travelers are not just pointing, they are pointing with cleaner hands, clearer sight, better agreement about what pointing means. In Holophase language, you could say it like this. As licensing tightens, phi acts become more comparable across agents. As comparability increases, convergence increases. As convergence increases, objectivity increases. That is a clean operational prediction. Now we need falsification. Concrete, plain. Here it is. If you can demonstrate a stable scientific fact that everyone accepts and uses reliably, without any possibility of shared comparison or cross-verification, then this claim fails. If X happens, this claim fails. If objectivity can exist without shareable comparison, then objectivity is not shared comparability. And there is a second falsification, equally sharp. If you can show an objective truth that is objectively true, but cannot, even in principle, be share-checked, cannot be compared across observers, cannot leave any public trace, cannot be retested, then this claim fails. Because our claim is that objectivity is, by definition, the shareable view. Now pause and feel how serious that is. It means, in a firewalled universe, objective is not a compliment you give to your favorite idea. It is a status a claim earns by surviving sharing. It is a certification stamp, not a personal crown. Now return to the mountain again, because the mountain holds the whole logic in one picture. Suppose the first traveler says, the mountain is exactly this far away. The second says, no, it is farther. The third says, no, it is closer. What happens? They don't yet have objectivity about distance. They have disagreement. So what do? They don't throw away the mountain. They adjust the comparison. They choose a shared standard. They agree on a pace count. They choose a rope length. They return tomorrow and measure again. They build a procedure that other travelers can repeat. And as the procedure stabilizes, the distance becomes objective. Notice what made it objective. Not the mountain's distance alone, but the shareable method of comparing. The ability for a fourth traveler to arrive next week, do the same steps, and get the same result with intolerance. That is objectivity. Now you can see how this connects to the deeper Holophase discipline without importing conventional primitives. In our framework, anything public must be licensed. Anything licensed must be comparable. And anything comparable across many agents can converge. And convergence is what we call objective. So objectivity is not the opposite of subjectivity in a moral sense. It is simply the difference between private phi acts and shareable phi acts. Subjective means tied to one perspective's comparisons, not stabilized across others. Objective means stabilized across many. Both are real as experiences. Only one is real as shared. Now, there is a common confusion here, and it breaks a lot of people. They hear objectivity emerges from agreement, and they think it means truth is just a vote. No, this is where the firewall language matters. Objectivity is not mere agreement. It is agreement produced by disciplined comparison under licensing. It is not, we all like it. It is, we all check it, and the checks converge. The travelers do not vote the mountain into existence. They converge on it by repeated pointing. They do not decide the ridge is there by preference. They test their pointings by walking and repointing. Agreement is the outcome of constraint, not the invention of fantasy. So, in the simplest terms, objectivity is shared constraint satisfaction. It is where many comparisons are forced into the same answer by the world's resistance to arbitrary stories. Now, I want to say something that sounds philosophical, but is actually practical. There is no view from nowhere. There is only stability across views. That sentence is the heart of this part, because it protects you from two opposite mistakes. One mistake is thinking, my view is the view from nowhere. That is arrogance. The other mistake is thinking, since no one has the view from nowhere, nothing is real. That is despair. Holophase gives a third path. Reality is what survives cross-view checking. Objectivity is what remains invariant when you change perspective and rerun the comparison. That is not despair. That is how every serious craft works. And I will keep it anchored in our one story. The travelers change position. They change angle. They return in different seasons. They ask other travelers. And the mountain remains the same target for their pointings. That is why it earns the name objective. Now, let's make the consequence explicit. If objectivity is shareable comparison, then the entire scientific enterprise can be restated in one line. Science is the organized production of shareable comparisons. Replication is not bureaucracy. It is objectivity manufacturing. Peer review is not politics at its best. It is convergence testing at its best. Calibration is not an annoying detail. It is the attempt to make different people's pointings commensurable. Measurement error bars are not weakness. They are honesty about how tightly the pointings converge. And when the convergence is tight, we call the result a fact. When it is loose, we call it a hypothesis. When it fails, we call it an error. That is the firewall in action. Now you might ask quietly, where does this leave reality in itself? Are we saying reality is only what we can share? We must be careful here. Our claim is not that nothing exists beyond shareable checking. Our claim is about the meaning of the word objective inside a discipline that refuses to smuggle primitives. Objectivity is a status for claims. It is the status of being share-checkable and stable. Whether there is more beyond that is not denied. It is simply not licensed as an objective claim until it can be brought into shareable comparison. This is not anti-reality. This is anti-pretending. This is exactly what a firewall is. Now let me give you the listener carry. One short sentence. Objectivity is shared comparability. Hold that. Hold it the way you would hold a compass direction, because it will help you in science. It will help you in arguments. It will help you in your own mind. Whenever someone says this is objective, you can ask a simple, non-hostile question. Can it be share-checked? Can different people compare it and converge? If yes, objectivity grows. If no, then it may still be meaningful, even beautiful, even important. But it is not objective yet. It is private, it is subjective, it belongs to a different category. And that is not an insult, it is a classification, a firewall classification. Now we close by returning one last time to the mountain. The travelers have stopped arguing over names. They have learned something deeper than language. They have learned the discipline of convergent pointing. They have learned that the world becomes objective not because one person declares it, but because the comparisons keep agreeing when the comparisons are repeated. They have learned the shareable view. And in holophase terms, they have learned that phi is not only the seed of difference, it is the seed of public truth. Because once phi differentiates into many perspectives, and those perspectives can line up their comparisons, objectivity is born. And with objectivity, science becomes possible. History becomes possible. Common life becomes possible. A shared world becomes possible. Now, in one calm transition, we step toward the next part. We have earned the less permission on the silent ground. We have defined what objectivity is without smuggling in a pre-built universe. Now we are ready to ask the next question. How does the silent ground become a sounding world? How does undifferentiated phi become differentiated phi? We will open that door gently. Next. And before we go, let me say in one breath what we wove in this part. We showed that objective does not mean mystically outside all viewpoints. It means stable across many viewpoints. And that stability is nothing but shared comparability, which is phi. So objectivity is not a thing you possess, it is a convergence a claim earns. Salam. Peace be upon you.